So with that, we have finished our housekeeping. We're so grateful that you're here with us today on this community briefing for families. And without further delay, to get us started in our conversation and learning for today, I would like to maybe ask all of you to send some emoji love to our acting superintendent, Andres Chait.
Thank you, Antonio. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We sincerely appreciate it. Again, my name is Andres Chait. I'm acting superintendent for LAUSD, and I am also a district parent, proud parent of two soon to culminate fifth grade students in Region North. It was important for me to have this meeting this morning because as we go into the budget process over the next few weeks, it's really critical to me that our community, our parents understand the process, understand some of the hard choices that we have to make over the next few years, and understand the why behind those choices and have an opportunity for engagement. I know that that's something when I've gone out and talked to parents in various roles that I've held over the years, that's definitely something that has been emphasized to me in those engagements. So again, from this place of leadership, I wanted to make sure that we engaged. It's also important to me that to the maximum extent possible, we be transparent about our processes. I know that many times when we're looking at budget documents and when we're looking at fiscal stabilization plans and LCAP documents, they can feel very daunting in terms of the content contained within them. So I think part of our charge, again, is of course to make sure that we make those documents as available and as transparent as possible for all of our constituents. So again, that's part of the reason why we're here today. So let me go right into our content. And after I offer some brief opening remarks, Saman Bravo Karimi, who's our Chief Financial Officer, will take us through a brief presentation. And then as Antonio referenced, we will have time for Q&A. So we are in the time of year where we have to finalize our budget for the coming year. As part of that process, we are also required to submit to the county what's called a fiscal stabilization plan. A fiscal stabilization plan is essentially a 3-year outlook for a district where we confirm for the county, because the county has an oversight role with us, that we in fact can balance our books for the next 3 years. Now it comes with a couple of challenges. We are asked to make, again, a 3-year outlook, a 3-year budget with, for the most part, really 1 year's worth of budget data. We basically know what our budget looks like, what our revenue looks like for next year. And even that part is still a little bit fluid. We don't really have too many ideas about what years 2 and 3 look like. And so what you'll see oftentimes is that in those year 2, year 3, what's sometimes called the out years, you'll see some significant reductions that have to be made because we do have to always be good fiscal stewards of our resources. Now, to be clear, we do have a structural deficit that we have to address. And I think we've been very transparent about that really over the last year and a half, if not longer. We experienced a significant surge in revenue during the COVID years, ESSER funds that allowed us to bring on additional positions to support our students in coming back on campus and to really address a lot of the impacts that COVID had on our school community. Those dollars are now gone. So we do have to address a mismatch, if you will, between, frankly, how much we spend as a district and how much we bring in. With that said, we will continue to advocate to Sacramento, which is, of course, where most of our dollars come from. As you may know, I've been up in Sacramento a number of times over the last few weeks. Board members have been up there with me, labor leaders have been up there with me. And that advocacy, I think, has been valuable. I think we saw some additional funding in the May revise. That's the governor's revision to his January budget prospectus that really reflects the advocacy. For example, we saw some significant increases in special education dollars. We saw a one-time discretionary block grant for all school districts across California. Again, I think that's a reflection of the work that we did. And we will continue to do that work. At the same time, I really want to emphasize for our parents, and again, I say this as a district parent, the experience, the lived experience for your children, for our students, will not change in the immediate. The budget for 26-27, the school year that begins on August 12th, is basically set at this point. So you won't see any significant changes at your children's schools in terms of teachers and staff. Yes, there will be some reductions, but it won't be at a large scale. So again, next year will feel very similar to this year. In the 2 following years, yes, as things stand now, we are anticipating some significant reductions in force to our workforce. Now, that doesn't necessarily impact the classroom experience because many of our classroom positions are mandated by contract language or by ed code language. So again, we don't anticipate seeing significant increases in class size or classes shrinking and so on. Where we will see an impact, of course, is particularly around support staff. We have attendance counselors, we have social workers at scales that we've never had before. We do anticipate, again, if nothing else changes with the budget over the next couple of years, we do anticipate that being impacted. Again, our commitment to you is that we will continue to be as transparent as we possibly can throughout this process and, of course, in the years to come. We will continue to advocate for the dollars that, frankly, our children deserve from the state. The state also needs to, honor its commitments around Proposition 98 and the dollars that need to come into our schools to fund us. So please know that that's our commitment. I know we have translation services, but I'm going to go ahead and go through my same remarks now in Spanish before I turn it over to Saman. Buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias por reunirse con nosotros hoy. Sí sé que todos tenemos varios compromisos de trabajo, de escuela, de familia, así que realmente les agradezco por hacer el tiempo para estar con nosotros. Por los que yo no he todavía conocido, mi nombre es Andrés Chay. Soy el superintendente en funciones del distrito desde los fines de febrero, ahora ya por más de 3 meses. Estamos aquí con ustedes hoy porque ya estamos en el procedimiento de finalizar el presupuesto para el año que viene. Y una cosa que es muy, muy importante para mí, no solamente como superintendente, pero también, francamente, como padre del distrito, yo tengo mis niñas en el 5º grado en la región norte, es que tenemos que ser muy transparente con nuestros padres, con nuestra comunidad, y realmente involucrarlos lo máximo posible en la información que estamos compartiendo con la mesa educativa y con el público. Entonces, por eso le pedí al equipo del señor Plasencia y a varios otros que tuviéramos esta junta y, por supuesto, vamos a tener otra junta la próxima semana. Entonces, como dije, ahorita estamos finalizando el presupuesto para el año que viene. Como parte de ese procedimiento, también nos exige el condado que hagamos básicamente un presupuesto para los 3 años que siguen, el año 26-27, 27-28 y 28-29. El reto que tenemos en hacer eso es que básicamente tenemos un entendimiento del presupuesto, el ingreso que va a recibir el distrito solamente para el año 26-27. Para el 27-28 y el 28-29 es más difícil saber realmente cuánto dinero, cuánto ingreso vamos a recibir de Sacramento y del gobierno federal. Pero de todos modos tenemos que hacer ese presupuesto por 3 años. Entonces, la semana pasada hicimos la primera presentación a la mesa educativa. Vamos a tener varias más hasta como los fines de junio, hasta finalizar el presupuesto. Lo que quiero dar énfasis es que en el año que viene, en el año 26-27, no van a haber muchos cambios para nuestros niños, para nuestros estudiantes. La experiencia en el salón, en la escuela, va a ser muy parecida a la que estamos teniendo este año. Los mismos maestros, mismos empleados, mismo nivel de servicio. Al mismo tiempo, tenemos ahora un déficit estructural. ¿Qué quiero decir con eso? Bueno, durante los años de COVID y después de COVID, recibimos ingreso particularmente del gobierno federal, también del gobierno estatal, a niveles que francamente nunca habíamos tenido. Y ese dinero se necesitaba. Era para ayudar a nuestros jóvenes, a nuestros estudiantes y a la comunidad escolar a regresar a las escuelas. Esos dólares ya se han gastado, ya se han básicamente puesto en nuestros presupuestos. Entonces ahora ese ingreso está bajando. Al mismo tiempo, tenemos más empleados y más servicios de lo que hemos tenido en cualquier otro tiempo del distrito escolar. Y también tenemos menos estudiantes que de lo que teníamos hace 10 años, 20 años. Entonces eso nos exige que realmente tenemos que mirar en nuestro presupuesto, mirar en nuestro personal y hacer decisiones difíciles sobre dónde vamos a poner nuestros fondos. Entonces, por eso yo quería que nuestra comunidad estuviera involucrada en las discusiones que vamos a tener en las semanas que vienen, para el año que viene y para los 2 años que siguen. Nuestro compromiso a ustedes es que siempre vamos a ser transparente con ustedes a lo máximo posible. Es muy importante para mí que la comunidad tenga un entendimiento de lo que está pasando. Vamos a hacerlo todo lo posible para involucrar a padres y a la comunidad en las decisiones que hacemos. Y al mismo tiempo vamos a seguir exigiendo que Sacramento y que el gobierno federal nos dé el ingreso, los dólares que francamente pertenecen a nuestros estudiantes. Por ejemplo, con la proposición 98. Como más probable algunos saben, yo estuve en Sacramento varias veces, también con miembros de la mesa educativa, miembros de los varios sindicatos, para juntarme con los legisladores para exigir que ellos siguieran sus propios compromisos con nuestro distrito. Yo creo que eso realmente ayudó. Vimos en el presupuesto de mayo que enseñó el gobernador, más dólares de lo que habíamos visto en enero, y vamos a seguir ese trabajo. Así que esta batalla no está terminada. Lo que tenemos en el presupuesto para 27, 28, 28, 29 no está finalizado, y vamos a seguir batallando para la parte de nuestros estudiantes y nuestros empleados. Así que con eso dicho, muchas gracias por juntarse con nosotros. So now at this point, I am going to turn our presentation over to Saman Bravo Karimi. Mr. Bravo Karimi is our Chief Financial Officer. He's going to walk us through a brief slide deck that brings a little bit more detail to what I just shared. And then afterwards, we'll have time for Q&A. Entonces, ahorita voy a pasar la presentación al señor Saman Bravo Karimi. El señor Bravo Karimi es nuestro oficiante gerente financiero. Él tiene una presentación breve que da un poquito más detalle de lo que acabo de compartir. Y después de eso vamos a tener tiempo para preguntas. Muchas gracias.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Saman Bravo Karimi. I am the Chief Financial Officer for the school district. I appreciate you being here with us this morning. We're going to cover some, next slide, please. I'm joined, of course, by two colleagues of mine, Dr. Kurt John, our Deputy Chief Financial Officer, and Wayne Gebeya, our Director of Budget Services and Financial Planning. So we're going to cover a few slides, several of which you may have seen at a presentation that we gave at a board meeting last Thursday. We've included some additional information, though, for the presentation this morning. Next slide, please. So the district is facing a financial challenge, and the challenge is that our expenses are projected to exceed our revenues over the next 3 years. What that means is we're spending more than we bring in. As Acting Superintendent Chait mentioned earlier, we have an ongoing deficit, and this deficit started last school year. So last school year was the first year in many years where we spent more than we brought in revenue. And that is happening again in the current school year and is projected to happen again in each year in the future. And what happens when we spend more than we bring in is the reserves that we have get fully spent, and eventually they can project to be negative. So this outlook, this situation is impacted by several factors, including declining enrollment, which we've had for over 2 decades, student attendance, the expiration and full use of COVID funds that we received, mostly from the federal government. To address this fiscal challenge, the district has developed a preliminary 3-year plan aimed at sustaining academic progress, but importantly in addressing these very serious financial challenges. As Acting Superintendent Chait mentioned, the plan is called the Fiscal Stabilization Plan. It's something that the district is required to submit to the county, and we're going to provide a little bit more information about that a little bit later. So throughout the presentation, we invite you to engage with us and provide input over the coming months and share this plan as we share this plan with you today. Next slide, please. So today we're going to cover a very brief overview of how LAUSD is funded, how districts in California are funded, a little bit of information about our overall budget and how it's structured and why we focus so much on the district's general fund budget. We're going to provide an update on the state of the district's budget, that financial challenge that I mentioned, and discuss opportunities for continued family and community engagement in the coming weeks and months. Next slide, please. So quick overview of how districts in California are funded. So there in the middle is LA Unified. And there's the central office, there are central region offices, and we send basically our attendance and enrollment data to the state and federal government, and that is the basis on which we're funded. Almost all of the funding that we received is based on student enrollment and attendance. So that information is sent to the state and federal government, and then the state and federal government then provides funding and different types of funding for different uses back to the district. Then the district, again in the middle, sends, it allocates funds to schools, and those funds are used for all the different resources that you see at your schools. Our teachers, our counselors, our administrators, our custodians, the front office clerical staff. So all of the resources of the district and those that you see at your school are funded as part of this process. Next slide, please. So now we're going to cover a little bit of information about how the district's overall budget is structured. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, at the top there in the dark blue, you'll see the different types of the major sources of revenue that we receive. We get the majority of our funding from the state government in the form of local control funding formula or LCFF funds. We also, of course, get funding from local property taxes. We get federal revenue. And then there are other sources of revenue as well. And so those revenues are required by the state and federal government to be put into specific funds. And you'll see highlighted there on the left side in yellow, operating funds and then the general fund. And those are the funds that we typically focus most of our attention to, because those are the funds that are funding our TK through 12th grade programs principally. So the different examples of our operating funds are first, under operating funds on the left-hand side, you'll see there's the general fund. In the current year, that's about $9.5 billion. We also have the Child Development Fund for our preschool programs. That's about $242 million. We have the Adult Education Fund for our adult education program. That's about $165 million. And then finally, our Cafeteria Fund, which funds all of our meal services, our meal programs. That's over $500 million. The general fund, though, is itself divided into unrestricted and restricted. And again, these are requirements that we are held to report the different revenues and expenditures in this way. And our unrestricted general fund is about $6.8 billion, and our restricted general fund is about $2.7 billion. Next slide, please. So here you'll see that same slide in Spanish. In some cases, you'll see slides that are going to be both in English and Spanish, but sometimes given the amount of information on the slide, you'll see a version of the slide that is in Spanish. Next slide, please. So next, we're going to cover updates on the state of the district's budget, the challenging financial outlook that we are facing. Next slide, please. So before we do that, I want to give a brief overview of the district's general fund unrestricted budget. So a couple slides ago, I showed you kind of the overall picture of the district's budget and the different funds that were required to report. And the general fund unrestricted is what funds our core TK through 12th grade programs. So our classroom teachers, our clerical staff, etc. And so here you'll see a pie chart, and on the right-hand side, you'll see a legend showing the different portions of the budget. And the important thing to note is that after meeting different required supports and the different provisions within our labor agreements, the options for general fund unrestricted reductions are somewhat limited. For example, there are certain staff members that are allocated to schools based on language in our labor agreements. So the examples of that, that's the first kind of in the top middle, you'll see the collective bargaining agreement or CBA defined staffing levels. And that includes your classroom teachers, counselors, librarians, psychiatric social workers, pupil service and attendance counselors, school psychologists, and those positions, those resources are a little bit over a third of the total general fund unrestricted budget. So that's about a third are positions that are allocated to schools and that are defined within our contracts with our unions, with our labor partners. There are additional positions that are allocated. Principally, they're allocated based on a school's enrollment, and those are kind of right below in the legend there, the lighter blue, the district assigned that are in addition to those that are in our labor agreements. Those positions include principals, clerical front office staff, school administrative assistants, financial managers, custodians, plant managers. And those represent an additional almost over 16% of our general fund unrestricted budget. So just those two categories alone, the positions that are allocated either because they're in our labor agreements with our unions or because they're allocated based on rules, based on enrollment, those represent over half of the district's general fund unrestricted budget. You'll see other major categories here like the Student Equity Needs Index or SENI. On the right-hand side in purple, you'll see the Black Student Achievement Plan, additional allocations for special education. And so because so much of what we provide in the general fund unrestricted budget is either required because it's in a labor agreement with one of our unions, or it's allocated by rule because of enrollment of our schools, the options for what to reduce when districts like ours are facing a very challenging fiscal outlook, those options are very, very limited. And that's why you'll see in the fiscal stabilization plan, in the preliminary fiscal stabilization plan, some very challenging reductions, some very difficult reductions in order to address the district's financial challenges. Next slide, please. Here again is the Spanish version of that previous slide. Next slide, please. So here is what we call the multi-year projection. So school districts in California are required to put forward multi-year projections. What multi-year projections mean are it's a 3-year projection of the district's finances. So we project our revenues and our expenditures. And then importantly, we also project our reserves or our ending balances. Reserves and ending balances can be thought of as our bank account, as our savings account. And as we spend more than we bring in each year, that has an impact on that bank account. That bank account, we can only spend more than we bring in if we have funds in our reserve, in our bank account. And over time, as we continue to spend more than we bring in, those reserves will not only be fully spent, but they'll go negative. And school districts are not allowed to have negative ending balances. If a school district has a negative ending balance in the current school year, that's when the county and the state begin to intervene and begin to make decisions on behalf of the district. So as you can see here, what you see here in light blue is this is a projection of our unrestricted general fund unassigned ending balances. These are the reserves or the bank account balances that can be used for any educational purpose. And we focus so heavily on these because this is the best indication of a district's financial health. It's not the only indication of a district's financial health, but it's a very, very important one, again, because these funds can be used for any educational purpose. And so in the light blue, you'll see where we were projecting these unrestricted ending balances to end each of these fiscal years from the current school year, 25-26, all the way at the far right to the end of the 28-29 school year. So in light blue is what we were projecting as of December at first interim. In green, you'll see what those projections look like in March as of our second interim report, one of the required reports that we submit to the county. And then finally in orange is the preliminary projection for these bank account balances in general fund unrestricted by June. And so the things that have changed substantially between December, then March, and now in June are, of course, recent labor agreements. And so the estimated cost of those recent labor agreements are reflected now in those orange bars. It also includes some of the updates we got from the state budget in May, in what's called the May revision. It's a proposed budget from the state, and those are included also in the orange. So what you see is that by the 27-28 school year, these unrestricted balances are projected to be negative by over $1.3 billion. And by the end of the 28-29 school year, they're projected to be negative almost $3.6 billion. And as I mentioned a moment ago, when districts are facing these types of projections where they're projected to spend down the reserves, and in fact, for those reserves to go negative, the district must take action. Not only because we're required to, by the county, to submit this fiscal stabilization plan, but to ensure that the district is fiscally solvent, to ensure that we can continue to operate important programs. And so we're not the only district that's facing a very challenging fiscal outlook throughout the state and the country. There are many, many districts facing very challenging fiscal outlooks, which is why you've seen probably many news reports about very difficult reductions that many districts are moving forward with. Next slide, please. So here is the proposed fiscal stabilization plan that will be, our board will be asked to approve this in June. So this is a preliminary plan that we presented for the first time to the board in public last Thursday. And one thing I need to mention is that about 12 months ago, the district also was required to submit a fiscal stabilization plan. That fiscal stabilization plan has already begun to be implemented. That plan already itself included very challenging reductions. This plan is in addition to the reductions from the previous fiscal stabilization plan. So the previous fiscal stabilization plan, which as of March was a little bit less than $1.4 billion in total reductions, those reductions are already assumed to be moving forward. And so every reduction that you see here is in addition to or above and beyond reductions in that previous fiscal stabilization plan. So I'm going to go through each of these items in some detail. So first we have revenues. So item number one are some additional revenues from the state that are being proposed by the state that were part of the May revision. Again, the May revision is a proposed budget that the governor releases. It's not the final budget, but it is a proposed budget that the state releases. And this May revision included more revenues than we were previously anticipating. And you'll see in the table here the estimates for the 26-27 school year, the 27-28 school year, and the 28-29 school year. And so in total, over this 3-year period, these additional revenues, the revenues beyond what we were previously anticipating, total about $1 billion. And so that fiscal challenge that we're facing, that projected negative $3.6 billion negative bank account balance that I showed on the previous slide, about $1 billion of that is going to be addressed by these proposed additional revenues from the state. Item number two is an assumption that our student attendance will be 93% starting next year. So our attendance rate over the last couple of years and the current year is about 92%. And so the assumption here is that because of the different strategies for increasing student attendance, that those strategies will continue to be successful and that we're going to have 93%, so about 1 percentage point higher attendance starting next school year, and that will continue in each of the years after. This has a very, very important academic and instructional and social emotional benefit for our students, but it also has a very important revenue impact for the school district. School districts, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, are funded based on their enrollment and attendance. And so this is very important, and we really appreciate all of the help that parents and families and guardians are going to, all the actions they're going to take to really help us meet this higher attendance target. The next section are the proposed expenditure reductions or budget cuts that are in this fiscal stabilization plan. You'll see a final column that says whether each of these items has a layoff impact. What I want to clarify first about layoff impact is many of these items, many of these reductions will have an impact on the number of positions that the district has in its budget. The number of positions that will need to be reduced in the budget. But the number of actual layoffs, the number of actual people that will no longer be employed by the district is different than the number of positions that are closed. That's something that played out in this last year. The district unfortunately did have to move forward with what's called a reduction in force. And the number of positions that were closed was much larger than the number of employees that were actually impacted and no longer employed by the district. So I'm going to go through each of these proposed expenditure reductions. Number 3 are central office reductions to contracts and non-labor. Non-labor is a category that includes not just contracted services, but also supplies and equipment. And what you'll see is that we are targeting a $50 million reduction in the 26-27 school year, and that would grow to a $200 million reduction in the 27-28 school year, and that would be an ongoing reduction, which is why you see $200 million in both the 27-28 column and the 28-29 column. So this is in addition to any reductions that were already made to non-labor budgets from this year into next school year. These are on top of the central office reductions that were already part of the previous fiscal stabilization plan. But because these are non-labor reductions, they do not have a layoff impact. Number 4 are additional reductions to central office positions. So from this year into next year, there were already significant reductions to central office and centrally administered or allocated positions. Here you'll see an additional $50 million of reduction starting in the 27-28 school year. Because these are reductions in positions, this would have a layoff impact. Item number 5 is the OPEB trust contribution, which would be at $0 moving forward. OPEB are the retiree health benefits that we provide to eligible employees. For employees that become eligible, they are provided medical insurance, the health benefits for them and one dependent, typically their spouse, for life. And what the district has been able to do over the last few years has been set aside additional funds, not only to pay for the cost of employees that are already retired and receiving these health benefits, but to put aside additional funds to cover the future cost of that growing cost for retiree health benefits. Under the current financial circumstances, the district is not going to be in a position to put additional funds for those future costs. And so that contribution towards future costs would be 0. And you'll see there the expected savings to the general fund unrestricted of changing that contribution to 0. Item number 6 is a committed balance. What this means is in last year's budget, in 12 months ago when the district was approving this year's budget, the district set aside or earmarked $46 million to cover the cost of potential reductions in federal funding. There was a lot of concern and uncertainty about reductions in federal funding due to the current administration's proposals and actions. And so the district set aside $46 million to offset any potential reductions in federal funding. The district is no longer in a position to continue to earmark or set aside that $46 million. And so that is instead going to be used to offset cuts that otherwise would have needed to be made in this plan. But what it also means is if there are reductions in federal funding levels, then we would have to make corresponding reductions in the programs funded by those federal funds. Item number 7, the next few reductions are reductions that do have a direct impact on school allocations. Item number 7 is the Student Equity Needs Index. There's an allocation. So based on the previous fiscal stabilization plan, the baseline funding levels for the 27-28 school year and beyond was $500 million. So you'll see that there's no reduction in the 26-27 school year, as Acting Superintendent Chait mentioned. There are no changes to the 26-27 allocations that were already allocated to schools a few months ago. But in the 27-28 school year, this plan does propose reducing CENI from $500 million, reducing it by $400 million, leaving $100 million to be allocated for the 27-28 school year. In the 28-29 school year, you'll see that the reduction is $500 million. So a $500 million reduction to the $500 million allocation would mean that no CENI funds would be allocated in the 28-29 school year. You'll see in that last column, this would have a layoff impact because the majority of these funds are used for supplemental positions at schools. These are not your classroom teachers, the administrators that are allocated based on student enrollment. These funds are for supplemental positions beyond those enrollment-based positions that are provided to schools. Number 8 is the Black Student Achievement Plan, or BSAP. The ongoing funding levels that were previously assumed before this plan is $125 million per year. You'll see it's reduced by $100 million, an ongoing reduction of $100 million. That would mean that the allocation in 27-28 and 28-29 and thereafter would be $25 million. This too, you'll see no figure, no number in the 26-27 school year. There is no impact on what's already been allocated for BSAP in the 26-27 school year, but it would be reduced to $25 million starting in the 27-28 school year. BSAP also is principally positions, and so this would also have a layoff impact. Number 9 is HEAT. It's another allocation. This is for, there are 16 schools. They're all BSAP Group 1 schools. It's a $10 million allocation. Here you'll see that it would be reduced to 0 or reduced by $10 million ongoing. This too would have a layoff impact. Number 10 is an allocation provided to affiliated charter schools, not independent charter schools. These are district charter schools. The net allocation to those schools is $7 million, and so a reduction of $7 million would represent an elimination of that allocation. This too would have a layoff impact. Number 11 is a reduction to the norm position. These are positions allocated based on usually mostly on enrollment. These are some of those norm positions that are not part of any contract with a union. The target here is to reduce those district-wide by $25 million ongoing. This also would have a layoff impact. And then number 12 is furlough days. So furlough days are when this does require negotiations with our labor partners. A furlough day is when we negotiate with our labor partners and employees don't work on certain days and therefore aren't paid for those days. The savings to general fund unrestricted of one furlough day is about $25 million. And so for the 27-28 school year, that $50 million reduction represents 2 furlough days for all employees. The $125 million reduction in the 28-29 school represents 5 furlough days for all employees. Number 13 is school consolidation and efficiencies and repurposing, potential repurposing of schools and campuses. This reduction was already part of the previous fiscal stabilization plan. So what you see here would be in addition to any reductions identified in the previous fiscal stabilization plan. There's a target of $30 million of savings from these efficiencies and consolidation and repurposing in the 28-29 school year. This too would have a layoff impact. And then finally, number 14 would be the sharing of health benefit costs between the district and employees. Right now, for eligible employees, the district pays the full cost of all benefits, regardless of an employee's number of dependents, regardless of the health benefit plan that they select. And so what's proposed here is that 10% of the cost would be paid by employees, and that would save $50 million to general fund unrestricted in the 27-28 school year and $100 million in the 28-29 school year. So I took a little bit more time on this slide just because there's a lot of information that I wanted to provide in addition to what you see on the slide. You'll see at the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the grand total of the different revenues and reductions in this plan. It's a little bit less than $3.6 billion. And that's a figure that you'll recognize because that is the projected negative ending balance or projected negative bank account balance that we need to solve for. Next slide, please. Here again, you'll see the same slide, but in Spanish. Next slide, please. So what will be the impact on schools? So Acting Superintendent Chait talked about this a little bit earlier, but the district, of course, remains committed to equity, student-centered decision-making, and of course, valuing our workforce, as shown in the recent labor agreements that are coming forward, some of them to the board for its approval in June. And consistent with these principles, balanced and sustainable operations will be maintained to support students' academic excellence. And so you did see on the previous slide, as part of that proposed plan, some very difficult reductions proposed. But what will continue and in fact increase as part of school budgets in the future is, first, the base allocation that schools receive for positions like classroom teachers and counselors and clerical staff and custodians and many other positions will continue as is. There are additional mental health and attendance supports. There are going to be increases in the psychiatric social workers and attendance counselors that are allocated to schools based on enrollment. And then program choices such as magnet schools, dual language programs, et cetera, will continue. Of course, the very important services that are provided for our students with disabilities as part of our special education program will also continue as is. And the continued support that priority schools receive, those schools that have been identified as needing the most support, will also continue. The arts education program will continue. Our Title I discretionary allocation to schools will continue. These are just some of the biggest examples of the allocations that will continue as is, and in some cases will be increased in the future. Next slide, please. So what may change starting in the 27-28 school year? So I mentioned this a bit in that proposed fiscal stabilization plan slide, but there will be reductions to the student equity needs index funds that schools receive, and that could impact the number of supplemental positions that schools use those funds to purchase. These are, again, our supplemental positions beyond the norm positions that are allocated every year to schools. Also is a reduction in the Black Student Achievement Plan allocation to schools, as well as central office supports that schools benefit from. And so even when we reduce the central office positions and contracts and non-labor budgets, that does have an impact on the support levels at schools. Next slide, please. So next, briefly, some opportunities for continued engagement for families and the community. Next slide, please. So first on the left, I mentioned this before, enrollment and attendance. Enrollment and attendance, and especially attendance, really helps students succeed academically and socially and emotionally. Please continue to encourage your students to attend at high levels, and it also has a very beneficial impact on our revenues. In the chat, in the middle, you'll see first to help us advocate for more funding from the state. In the chat, you'll see a toolkit that'll help you advocate on behalf of the district and your students. Of course, you can always engage with local and state elected officials to make your voice heard. And then finally, on the right-hand side, engaging in the budget process. So continue participating in the local school budget development process with your school site councils or in coffees with the principal, and continue participating in the LCAP engagement process. Next slide, please. This again is just a Spanish version of the previous slide. Next slide, please. So next steps, in June 16th is the LCAP and budget hearing. Also on June 16th, the board will be asked to vote on that preliminary fiscal stabilization plan, as well as to approve more recent labor agreements, our collective bargaining agreements. Then on June 23rd, the board would vote on the district's budget and LCAP, the budget and LCAP for next school year. Next slide, please. Again, this is the Spanish version of the previous slide. Next slide, please. And so I know we're going to spend a little bit of the remaining time answering questions. And so please, Antonio, thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. For our participants, we do invite you to assist us in providing your questions in the Q&A icon that you see on your screens and on your smartphones. We are going to be taking questions based on the order that we have been receiving them. We have them collected here in the order in which they were presented. So we'll start with questions in this order, and we will do our best to get through as many of these as we can in the time that is made available. And we're so grateful that you've offered these questions because we will be arranging these and making these available to inform our frequently asked questions general document. On the back end, one of my team members, for those of you that are joining us here today, my colleague will be unmuting you and inviting you to present your question directly to our panelists here. So please be ready, have your question in sight so that you can present it directly to our panel. The first participant that we have here is David R. David, can you please join us in presenting your question directly to the panel here?
Okay, I'm on. Can you hear me?
We can. Welcome, David.
Fantastic. Thank you. Now, I'm wondering is that during the school board budget meeting, I believe it was last week, is that they estimated somewhere around 6,000 positions might need to be affected in the 2027-2028 school year. I believe it's for the next 3 years, but the majority will be for the school year after this one. And are these going to be people that retire or quit, or are there actually going to be RIFs involved? And more importantly, are these RIFs, how many of them are going to be involved certificated classroom teachers? And I'm wondering for both 2027-28 and then 2028-2029, what is your guesstimate, your best case scenario of how many positions will need to be to get that March 15th layoff notice versus your worst case scenario?
Thank you so much, David, for joining us today.
Sure. So that estimate is a very preliminary estimate based on the size of the reductions that were identified in that preliminary fiscal stabilization plan. And so we don't know yet what the breakdown of certificated versus classified positions in that estimate will be. But to answer your question about the kind of distinction between reduction in force and then actual layoffs, you pointed out that, yes, there are always retirements and other reasons why people might leave the district voluntarily. For example, they might move or go work somewhere else. And so that estimate, again, it's just an estimate, but that number of positions that would be reduced is not the same number of people that would ultimately be laid off from the district. But I do need to be honest that given the size of the amount of positions that are likely going to need to be reduced as part of this plan, there will almost certainly be an impact on individual employees where there will be layoffs, only because while we do have significant what we call attrition, which is retirements and other reasons why people leave the district, given the size of the reductions, that attrition or those numbers of retirements are very unlikely to be sufficient to ensure that everybody that's currently employed with the district will continue to be employed with the district in the 27-28 school year.
Thank you, Simon. Our next question is from Sonia Ryder. Can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, thank you. In years past, when we've had these very important webinars, you have taken the time to compile extremely comprehensive FAQs that have then been posted on the website for all of us to refer back to. Will you be continuing that practice with the questions that you're gathering from this session and the next one?
Tony, I'll just jump in here. This is Andres. So the short answer is yes. We will be putting an FAQ together based on the questions gathered at this convening and also at one that we're having next week and making it available for the public. The presentation that Simon already shared is already available, but we'll make sure to push it out further.
Thank you. The next question is from LL. We see you out there, LL. If you're with us here, please unmute your mic.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, thank you first of all for having this webinar. It's very informational. I had several questions. One of them was already answered. I guess there was mention of consolidating schools. So my thought then is, what type of assistance will there be for students who need transportation? if I'm understanding that schools will be closed and students assigned to different schools. I'm assuming some of them may need transportation.
So thank you, LL, for the question. So yes, as part of our plan around addressing our structural deficit and really putting the district on better financial footing for years to come, we are looking at consolidation. To kind of ground us in some data, we have basically over 1,000 schools, over 710 square miles, that once were meant to serve a student enrollment of about 700,000 students. When I started with the district back in 98, 99, we were consistently in the sixes and the sevens when it came to enrollment. Now, if you look at our students, again, not counting independent charter students, we're at about 385,000 students. So there is a disconnect there, and it's a disconnect that directly impacts the academic experience of our students. Because, for example, in elementary schools, and I was formerly an elementary principal, if you don't have that many students, what you end up with is combo classes, a 2-3 split, a 4-5 split, and so on. At the high school level, if you don't have that many students, you end up with a master schedule that does not really offer a diverse set of classes. There's not as many electives, there's not as many advanced placement questions. Our commitment is that as we go forward in this process around schools that may be consolidated, and by the way, there's different versions of consolidation. There is a school closure. There's also looking at, for example, when you have 4 high schools on one campus, could those be combined into one high school? So there's some savings generated there. We will engage the community throughout that process. It's going to be a holistic process. And what I mean by that, it's not going to be simply if a school has X number of students, that school will close. It's never that simple. It's also about academic achievement, geography, and so on. The direct answer to your simple question is yes. If we end up in a scenario where a school is closed, we would absolutely offer transportation services as needed to the students of that residential area.
Thank you. The next question is from Yadira Avalos. Can you please unmute and ask your question, Yadira?
I believe Ms. Avalos may have left the meeting.
Thank you very much. The next question we see here is a question from Valerie. Are you with us, Valerie?
Hi, yes, thank you. My question is if you knew in February that you were experiencing financial challenges, why would you give raises that you clearly couldn't afford in April?
Thank you, Valerie. When we look at our workforce is the lifeblood of the work that we do. I said this at a convening yesterday. As much as impactful as the role of a superintendent can be, I do not directly impact the lived experience of our students. That's done by our teachers, by our staff on our campuses, and so on. We also acknowledge the cost of living that comes with living and working in Los Angeles. And so the tentative agreements that we entered into with our labor force address some of those issues. Also within those agreements, there's language specifically around services that will be available at schools. For example, social workers, attendance counselors, community representatives, and so on. So it's not just a salary commitment, it's also about a staffing commitment. The commitment that we now have to each other, and the we, let me define the we here. The we is the district and labor, is to work together as we have in the past, because I want to be very clear. The district has given significant raises to the workforce in the past and has managed to embed those raises into our operating budget. 2019 recently is a recent example, and we have also in the past. And so our commitment to each other is that we will work together to advocate for the revenue that, frankly, our district deserves. I'm not talking about a gift of money from Sacramento. I'm talking about, I'll give you a very salient example. There is almost $4 billion of Proposition 98 dollars. Again, those are education dollars, not all for LAUSD, of course, that's for the entire state, K-12 and community colleges, that is being withheld. If those dollars were released as they should be to serve the students of today, that would significantly address the deficits that we're talking about. As Mr. Bravo Karimi indicated in his presentation, Between this January and May, from what we saw in the January budget from the governor and what we saw this May, the additional dollars that were put into that May revise already addressed $1 billion worth of this deficit. So again, our commitment is to continue to work together for the dollars that will put our district in a position to best serve our students and communities.
Thank you. The next question that we have is from Nicole Pfefferman. Can you unmute Nicole to join us here?
Mr. Placencia, I believe Ms. Pfefferman may have left.
Gabriela Rangel, si gusta, por favor, en este momento, te van a quitar su mudo.
Sí, gracias. Buenos días. Tengo una pregunta con respecto a que hay muchísima información de confusión sobre la reducción de 1,000 puestos de trabajos por medio del presupuesto y realmente sí es mucha confusión y también tengo otra pregunta con respecto de la instrucción académica combinada que se va a hacer. ¿Se va a llevar a cabo exactamente el entrenamiento para maestros y para los estudiantes? Y también la importancia para mi sugerencia y recomendación para de usted para las escuelas es que tenga mejor el maestro, personal de administración y estudiantes. Porque ¿para qué queremos tanto personal si no van a ser efectivos y se van a pagar más, se va a invertir más presupuesto ahí? Tenemos que tener lo esencial para que los estudiantes tengan mejor aprovechamiento académico. Gracias.
Gracias a usted, señora Rangel, por la pregunta y la sugerencia. En el sentido del contenido de hoy día, sí sé que es bastante información. Como comentamos anteriormente, vamos a asegurar que esa información esté disponible para padres, incluyendo una serie de preguntas y respuestas basado en el comentario que ustedes nos dan hoy. En el sentido de entrenamiento para maestros y obviamente aprendizaje para estudiantes, 100% de eso va a seguir en paso por los próximos años.
The next question is from Brian Diaz. Brian Diaz, can you, our team will be promoting you. Can you please unmute? And just for everyone's awareness, we have about 7 minutes left to go here, and we'll do our best to get through as many questions as possible.
I believe Brienne has left.
Okay. How about Zair's mom? Zair's mom, are you here today?
That individual also, unfortunately, has left.
All right. We have a question here from Yadira Avalos. Can you unmute and join us here, Yadira?
I think we'll need to move to the next.
Of course. All right. Damika Mitchell, are you with us here, Damika? Please unmute and present your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Good. Okay, hi. I was just asking what the CINI was, but Ms. Nguyen did answer my question with a brief explanation as to what that is. But I also wanted to know, since I have you live here, I saw that there was going to be a cut to the BSAP program. Is that temporary? Is it going to go away? Is it just going to be reduced? How exactly is it going to be impacted?
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell, for the question. So yes, let me walk us through the next few years and the current year as far as BSAP funding. And for folks, just to make sure everyone knows what we're talking about, BSAP stands for the Black Student Achievement Plan, and it's additional supports that we provide to specific schools. The majority of the support is done through personnel, school climate advocates, psychiatric social workers, attendance counselors, a few other critical positions. For the current year, the year that's about to end in about a week and a half, The funding for BSAP is set at $175 million. For the coming year, the budget for BSAP is set at $125 million. So as you can see, there's already a reduction there. But again, the funding levels are at about $125 million. For the 2 out years, 27, 28, 28, 29, currently we have a budget figure in there of $25 million. Now, BSAP, to be clear, is one of our priority programs. So as we see additional revenue come in, as we maybe prioritize additional reductions in other areas, then we would want to augment those dollars. But for the time being, the current budget for BSAP for those 2 later on years is set at $25 million.
All right. Our next question is slightly aligned, and it's coming from Adam's iPhone.
I have to be honest with you. My mother was thank God I was.
Well, my question about BSEP is like, what is 25 million even, what does a BSEP program of 25 million even look like? I mean, if you're taking away SENI and you're taking away BSEP, it seems like you're taking away a lot of the equity that is the district is like been working towards achieving in our highest need schools. And in 2 years, they're going to be decimated with a loss of personnel, support, and programs.
We were the only Black people there.
Thank you, Adam. And to be very transparent, I share your concern. You know, we understand the positive impact that BSAP has had on our schools. We want to maintain that commitment. But the reality is that as we present the budget, as we present a fiscal stabilization plan, we have very limited options in where we can make reductions to meet a mark of $3.5 billion. With that said, again, as I said to the earlier question, our commitment is that as we look at additional revenue coming in, as we look at advocacy at Sacramento, as we look at reductions in other areas, BSAP will be a priority area for restoration of funding.
I started working because, again, that was during the time where there was, a handful of brown girls.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. Well, the next question that we have on the list here is from Corina Rodriguez. Corina Rodriguez, would you like to present your question?
Ms. Rodriguez, you just need to unmute your microphone and you can ask your question.
Favor de prender su micrófono, señora Corina Rodríguez. All right. We will be moving on to Miss Miho Murai. If you're with us, can you please unmute?
Hello?
We can hear you, Miss Murai.
Okay, hi. I'm driving. But anyways, so I know I put a bunch of questions, but I guess my most immediate question is you mentioned that there's going to be cuts to the Central District office. I'm curious as to specific personnel. Who will that be? Because I've strongly always advocated, I'm a special ed attorney and the due process specialist. And so when is to file for due process, there's a resolution session that's supposed to happen, but due process specialists are so overwhelmed and they get the case usually the day before that they can't even try to resolve it at that level. And so I've always advocated to have less spending towards opposing counsel that you guys hire for outside. Once a case isn't settled at mediation, it goes to outside counsel often. And so their incentive is to increase attorney fees so that they can make more money, and then they're getting the money from the district. But rather than the district having a very pro-litigation stance, which is what's happening now, I suggest, and I'm curious to know, like, will this due process specialist be, will the due process unit, the IDR unit, will those agents, those departments be impacted by the budget cuts that you said that will be made to the central district offices? And if not, what other cuts will be, what specific cuts? Because I think there's always general, we're going to make more cuts, but I think we would like to know specifically like what areas. And then also, will the region east, will the regions be cut, the personnel? And I also think that SFACE needs to have more funding because they're the one department that really are supposed to be working with the parents. So no cuts should be made to that department.
Thank you, Ms. Moran. I very much appreciate the feedback. As far as the reductions that will be made, if that's the work that we'll be taking on in the first few months of the next school year, we obviously want to make strategic decisions. I'm not a big believer in just making a reduction across the board without obviously factoring in the impact of different work streams and the folks that handled those work streams. But thank you for the question.
Our next question is from Shalina. Are you with us, Shalina? We have time for about 2 more questions. So, Shalina, are you with us here at the moment?
I think we might need to move on to
Okay.
the.
Right. How about Nina Lesher? Are you with us, Lena? Please unmute when you're promoted.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Nina. Yeah,
Okay,
go ahead.
thank you. Thank you for taking these questions. I was just curious about when you make these reductions, how much effort has been put into eliminating wasteful spending? We hear in the public, we hear about the lawsuits and people, taking money from LAUSD. And I happen to know personally that that LAUSD has to factor in a lot of litigation fees from lawsuits. Like, how are you able to reduce that kind of spending so that you have budget for important things like the children and improving education?
Thank you, Nina, for the question. And it's obviously a very salient question, particularly in this time. So the first thing that we do before we even look at any reductions in force and in layoffs is exactly what you just referenced, is look at our own internal processes or the things that we could be doing better or doing differently to avoid, I wouldn't necessarily call it waste, but to avoid waste, to avoid unnecessary litigation. If there's anything in those spaces that we can address, we're absolutely going to address it proactively. We're also going to look at, because I know there's been a lot of dialogue about this in the community, particularly in the last few months, we're going to look at contracts or non-labor spending in general, which includes contracts. And are there things that we could be doing internally, that we could be doing differently, that we could be doing less of if that will have a positive impact on our district and our ability to offset some of the other reductions. So absolutely, that's work that we will be taking on, frankly, now.
For our final question today, we have Pedro. Pedro, can you be promoted and unmute yourself to present your question? And I see Pedro that is with us.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Pedro. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Well, I have a very simple question. I mean, when you talk about everything that we're waiting for the governor to do and a couple of things that we're doing, but I mean, have you guys hired somebody or, looked at, people that actually focus on looking for funding for schools and everything else to, how do we increase our funding? I mean, we've been talking about decreasing for years. I mean, and now, our population has increased so much in this area.
You can speak a little bit louder, Pedro. Thank you.
Going to charter schools or what? That is not being used for LAUSD or, because I see a lot of people using, the benefits of LAUSD, but it's still using kind of charter system. So how is that going to work? I mean, are we looking at anything to fix that part of the budget? You know.
Thank you, Pedro. And I know that the sound was a little muffled, but Pedro's asking, what are we doing to raise funds to fix the budget outside of what we're waiting for? And I think that's a wonderful segue to our really thinking about our call to action that we made during today's presentation.
Yeah, so I'll highlight a couple of things, and thank you, Pedro, for the question. I'll highlight a couple of things that we've already kind of weaved into our presentation today. One is looking at attendance. Student attendance has obviously, multiple benefits primarily to our students in terms of, learning and achievement. Obviously, we always say, you can't teach the empty seat. So we need our students in attendance. With every 1% that we increase our daily attendance, that generates over a period of about 3 years, about $60 million worth of additional revenue. So that's definitely one of the things that we're looking at. I also reference again our continued advocacy to Sacramento. We will continue to work with our state legislators, with the governor. Particularly, we'll have a new governor. As of early next year, we'll work with our legislators to again look at the revenue that may come in from Sacramento. Last thing I'll say about attendance, because this is work that's near and dear to my heart. We are currently at a rate of 92% in terms of daily attendance. That is a significant increase in the post-COVID years. Our rate of chronic absenteeism, which is when a student misses 18 or more school days 16 or more school days in a given year, we've cut that in half over the last few years. So when we were coming out of COVID, we had a rate of chronic absenteeism of almost 40%. Now we're down to 20. Now that's still significant. I want to be very clear about that. But we know how to do the work. We know how to engage with our communities around attendance. So we have seen some significant improvement in those areas. And I want to thank our families for helping us with that work. In closing, Antonio, if you don't mind, I'll kind of go ahead and close us out. I want to end where I began, and that's with gratitude. Gratitude for making the time to be with us today. Gratitude for continuing to engage with us in these conversations. And just know that our commitment continues to be to engage, to be as transparent as we can with our information. And I look forward to future engagements. Thank you so much.